Strategically, these Yemen rebels and Iran who run them have us by the balls. There's not really much we can do to them, and they can cause a lot of issues.
What is Trump doing here? Is his goal to expel these violent criminals, as he says, or is his goal to sort of dismantle the sort of legal order that we have in the United States right now?
Their goal basically is to get a missile that can reach Israel.
And frankly, people are getting paid vacations right now. DOGE is supposed to be shrinking the federal government in a smart way. Some of these people are getting a month off vacation with back pay.
He's obviously been cozying up to Netanyahu, and he's been talking all that nonsense about Gaza.
I think everybody underestimated what was going to happen in Ukraine. Unfortunately, as we look back in history, that's how war happens. Everybody underestimates what's about to happen, and then it does.
I mean, who knows what the consequences are? You piss these people off enough, you treat them bad enough, you kill enough of them, and eventually human beings are going to fight back. They're going to do something. Hi everybody, this is John Koenig back for Real Veteran News 46. I'd like to thank everybody for watching, and just remember that if you want to help out, please watch the whole video, leave a comment. I don't say that every week, but it helps. I appreciate it. This week I'm going to try to keep this part short because I spent more time talking to Ted about Ukraine and talking with Robin and Chuck about the various issues that we debated at the end of the show. So the thing I do want to talk about this week is Yemen and Trump's missions in bombing Yemen and so on and so forth. So Yemen. I personally don't really care about Yemen, and I don't think many of you do either. It's another one of these countries like Afghanistan that doesn't really have that much going on, but it is at a strategic location in the southwest or southern, essentially, part of the Arabian Peninsula. It's on the edge of the Red Sea there, and all of the traffic coming in and out of the Suez Canal goes in through there. So functionally, strategically, it's essentially right by the Suez Canal because you have to pass by there on your way in or your way out. We all know Suez Canal is the most important passageway on that side of the world. We've got the Panama Canal on this side, but over there, all of that trading going to Asia back and forth goes through the Suez. If you're not really familiar with what's going on, basically Iran is pissed off at us and Israel, and they fund these rebels in Yemen that have control there. And so they used cheap drones and missiles to attack random ships that are going through the straits there, and thereby disrupting shipping, and that's kind of like their form of protest. We have been patrolling that area for a while now. I'm not sure really when it started. The Navy's been doing a lot of work there, a lot of deployments to essentially shoot down these drones and missiles. We're spending a lot of money. A lot of our warships are being tied up there and on these cheap drones. And there's not really any way to stop them from doing this. We've done some bombing in Yemen, which doesn't really do anything. I mean, bombing Yemen is like bombing Afghanistan. It doesn't really matter. I'm just really hoping that we don't get sucked into some kind of quagmire situation there. We don't have a lot of options, and I just hope that Trump doesn't decide to escalate even further and start sending special ops troops in there, or even more traditional ground troops to try to hold some of the territory. He might try to do this to try to cover up for some other thing that he's got going on, kind of like a wag the dog scenario. Strategically, these Yemen rebels and Iran who run them have us by the balls. There's not really much we can do to them, and they can cause a lot of issues with these shipping lanes that will disrupt the global economy and trade, and we are like these protectors of global trade and so on and so forth. So they've really found a way to kind of hit back at us, one of these kind of gray zone conflict strategies that China has been using in their neck of the woods and Russia's been using in Ukraine and elsewhere, where it doesn't completely draw us into a full-scale war, because our whole system is set up was either we're like in the war or like not in a war. So it's very hard for us to operate in these gray zones. Right now, Iran with these Yemen rebels are tying up 2 aircraft carriers, which is a huge part of our naval power. And there's no sign that they are stopping. They don't have to do anything except just keep shipping missiles over there, which are pretty cheap. Trump has been escalating on these Yemen rebels and against Iran. He's talking a lot of shit about attacking Iran and so on and so forth. He's obviously been cozying up to Netanyahu, and he's been talking all that nonsense about Gaza, which is getting people in the Middle East worried, I guess you could say. I think most people don't think it's a reality, but Israel abandoned the truce that was negotiated within the last couple of days and attacked into Gaza again. They say that the Hamas was planning to do an attack on their own, so it's like both sides. You don't know which one is being truthful, or maybe they're both still at each other's throats or whatever, but the negotiations don't seem to be working there, and Trump has really gone all the way onto Netanyahu's side, even worse than Biden was, because everybody was mad at Biden, and when Trump was running for president, he made it seem like he was going to be more open to alleviating the situation in Gaza, which would entail kind of reining in the Israeli military and political leadership there. Obviously, Iran is ramping up their nuclear program. He pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal back in his last term, and they're pretty close to getting a nuclear bomb. I'm not sure where they're at with their missiles, if they're able to deliver it. Israel is pretty committed to doing some sort of attack in Iran to stop that, but they would require our help because they don't have the heavy Air Force assets like the refueling or bombers and so on. They only have fighter jets. And so they would need our help for that, which basically makes us complicit in that, which puts us and Israel against Iran, an attack inside Iran. Maybe if it was limited to some, nuclear facility or whatever, might not start some huge war or whatever, but any kind of attack in Iran, especially if it kills Iranians, especially if it kills innocent Iranians that aren't part of the military or something like that, is going to engender a ton of support among their population against us. It gives their government, which is not popular, a foreign boogeyman to point at and blame all of their problems on us, blame all their problems on the Jews, and it just keeps them in power longer. I mean, the way that this ends up ending with a good story and a good ending is for Iran to kind of shed these religious extremists, although it's not really so much about religion anymore. It's kind of just like a thugocracy. And to get them to liberalize, open up, and so on and so forth. I've been thinking about the Iranian bomb for many years, this neocon way of thinking about it, where you're like, Iran can't have the bomb. It's like, well, they can. The technology is proliferated. They have the know-how. They've got 60 million people in their country. They have engineers. They partner with Pakistan, which had the first Muslim bomb. They essentially can turn on the bomb roughly when they want to. And even if we manage to hack them or bomb them or whatever, all it's going to do is slow down the inevitable. Israel has maybe 70 to 80 nuclear weapons, although they won't admit it. And so they're the only nuclear power in the Middle East. The Iranians aren't going to stand for that, just like the Chinese aren't going to stand for Taiwan sitting off the coast there indefinitely either. Like, these countries don't necessarily care about some short-term consequences. These are very important goals for them politically and for their national pride, and they want to have a nuclear weapon. I mean, Pakistan has a nuclear weapon, and they want one too, so that the Israelis don't have the upper hand and the national prestige over them in that, because this rivalry is really between Iran and the Israelis at this point. So maybe Israel attacks Iran and we help them. They do the dirty work and we just kind of help. Or we attack Iran at Trump's order. Not really sure what that looks like. Could be bad. Could start some bigger war. We definitely don't want to get into the war in the Middle East. We definitely don't want to be fighting Iran, which is bigger and more powerful than Iraq was. And we didn't have a very good time in Iraq. We can't invade these countries and hold them. We've seen that. There's not a lot of options. These people are kind of going to do what they're going to do. And their response would involve a lot of nasty work. They've got Hezbollah agents all over the world. They've got Iranian intelligence agents. They've got allies, other terrorist groups. I mean, they're everywhere. All they have to do is turn them on, turn these sleeper state agents on, tell them to execute their missions, and they could kill a lot of people inside the United States. They could kill people in Europe. There are many targets for them, many options, and we don't have defenses for these attacks. They haven't been very successful with cyber attacks and so on. They could do some cyber. They don't have a space program, and they don't have a long-range missile program. Their goal basically is to get a missile that can reach Israel. If we start this war with them, I don't really know where it ends, what are our objectives or our goals. we can't beat these people in Yemen. We definitely can't beat Iran. All we can do really is negotiate with them, and we're not doing a lot of that. Trump doesn't seem to be picking the right sides in this. He's not playing both sides. It's not going well. Things are just getting worse, basically. I mean, I don't know what he's gotten, really. I mean, they had that brief truce, the Israel-Hamas truce, but that's gone now, and there's not much to show for his efforts in the Middle East. Why is all this happening? It's happening because our country essentially is controlled by Israel. We give them weapons, money, we feed their war machine, and they won't listen to us. I'm not saying we should abandon them or anything, and we have things in common with them, but their behavior reflects on us. I've said this before. They do something and we get associated with it. We're in the background. We're the one that enables them. And so the people who are blaming Israel also by proxy are blaming us. And we've seen that this has resulted in 9/11, and we could have another 9/11 or something similar or what. I mean, who knows what the consequences are. You piss these people off enough, you treat them bad enough, you kill enough of them, and eventually human beings are going to fight back. They're going to do something. And our defenses aren't great. Our leaders aren't great. Our military is not invincible. And eventually something bad is going to happen. All right, time to have our one-on-one discussion this week with Ranger friend, Ranger brother, Ted Kennedy. How are you doing, Ted?
Morning, doing fine. How are you?
Great, yeah. Real veteran news in the morning. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, Ted Kennedy, retired Army, close to 30 years active, retired as E9 in Germany as a planner for one of the largest training organizations in Europe. Contracted overseas a while, and now here I am enjoying Florida.
Florida, okay. Yeah, all right. Is it humid there?
This morning it was actually cold for our standards. It was in the mid 40s, which by everybody else's standards is probably warm right now.
That's warmer up here than there. All right, well, asked Ted to do the talk this week because it seems like the Ukraine peace negotiations are bubbling up a little bit. I thought there'd be a little bit more progress, but we got a lot of stuff to talk about. So we'll be talking about Ukraine, go back and forth on some topics we're both interested in. The first thing I'm interested in was that Trump and Putin had a phone call for 2 hours, and it apparently went over a wide range of topics. Also, they talked about the Middle East. Some people were saying that the fact that they didn't just talk about Ukraine gave Putin a chance to pivot away from Ukraine. And they talked about issues in Ukraine. They did agree to an energy infrastructure truce. So supposedly the Russians are not going to attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Supposedly the Ukrainians are not going to attack Russian energy infrastructure. Trump asked for a 30-day ceasefire that the Russians were not interested in right now because they have like an advantage right now since Trump paused aid and the intel sharing and everything. So they are kind of at an advantage. So he's not really interested in ceasefire right now. I'll just go first on like my opinion of it. I think that just the fact that he had the phone call is different than what Biden was doing. Trump seems like fixated on Biden. He was very fixated on Hillary Clinton before, but I think that he's more fixated on Biden now because of his loss in 2020. He has some kind of like post PTSD on 2020, and he wants to just like shit on Biden at any possible turn, and he probably will not stop doing this. So he wants to do everything the opposite of Biden. We know Biden hadn't talked to Putin one-on-one for I think over 3 years and didn't through the end of his presidency. And Trump, if you have some kind of like Trump doctrine here on this, is kind of like the normalization of relations between the two nuclear superpowers, although there's many other nuclear nations, and China is the real superpower. Russia is really not a superpower. And things that I've noticed is that I feel like Trump and his people are, especially with the Zelensky Oval Office thing, they were hyping up this like nuclear war, nuclear powers, you're playing with nuclear war. And it's kind of like this political language now. Like we know there's not going to be a nuclear war. Like that's ridiculous. It's just, the Russians don't want that. Nobody wants that. It's not going to happen. I do believe in the reduction of nuclear weapons would be good for all of us. We could save money and just make things safer. But he's using this nuclear power to justify his normalization because the world had kind of recoiled against Putin's invasion and the bloodiness of it and their tactics and all the human rights stuff. And they've ostracized him. And so Trump wants to de-ostracize. And that's basically the opposite of Biden. And so they're using this nuclear war specter in that way. So what do you think about nuclear war and the politics around the normalization of Russia, US under Trump?
I think mutually assured destruction, MAD, interesting acronym, is still alive and well. Any country that has the ability to deliver nuclear weapons across the globe is a superpower. They have to be taken into account. This is probably why North Korea is trying its hardest to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile. I believe that Russia has the upper hand right now because of North Korea. They've introduced tens of thousands of troops. They've introduced millions of rounds of ammunition. And as you said, the Ukrainians pulled out of Kursk. That's no longer a chip they have on the table for bargaining. With regards to, I don't know that it's normalizing relations. I don't know that we've ever had normalized relations with Putin. I think we've had cordial. I think we've had warm relations, but certainly not friendly. I believe it was a mistake early on to come out of the holster on Putin like we did. A terrorist, a madman, a dictator, all these things. We've known that for years. He's been in power for over 20 years. Then all of a sudden, he's all these things. That really limits our ability to negotiate with him. And there has to be a negotiated end to any war. Every war we've ever fought, there was a negotiated end to. Sometimes the ruler of the other power stayed in. For example, Hirohito stayed in as a figurehead, if nothing else, in Japan at the end of World War II. And look at what the Japanese did. In fact, his family is still considered royalty in Japan. So as far as no precedent, we seem to always pick out Hitler. Oh, look at Hitler, Hitler this, Hitler that. There's a lot of other examples out there. I mean, I think Joe Stalin was probably a hell of a lot worse than Putin, and he was our best buddy for 5 years in the early 1940s. So let's be careful of how we pick and choose our moment in history to say precedent. There's a lot of precedent throughout history that we can look back to. That's my thought on that.
All right. Well, in our discussion one-on-one, you've brought up a bunch of interesting topics regarding the Russia-Ukraine. Is there one that you want to highlight right now we can talk about?
I mean, overall, as I just said, there's got to be a negotiated end. It's been more or less a stalemate for 3 years. Yeah, the Ukrainians have made a few gains here. The Russians have gained a lot of it back. I would say let's take a look at what Europe needs to do versus pointing fingers and saying, oh, goodness, now that Trump's in power, the Ukrainians are going to lose. Well, what has Europe as a whole, not just NATO, not just the European Union, but Europe as a whole, where do they stand on the outcome of this war? Not a rhetorical question. They all have a stand. And I think they've spoken with their lack of support for Ukraine and the fact that they're still buying fossil fuel from Russia.
Okay, I'm interested to talk about Europe as well. I'm interested in this coalition of the willing. It seems like the UK and France are kind of like this Western Europe, and they are lining up to kind of take over the mantle now that Trump has sort of abdicated, gotten rid of the whole Biden doctrine of this. Then you have like Central Europe. You've talked about Germany. They're kind of on the fence. Eastern Europe is on the front line, but there's some more right-leaning places there. It's kind of a mixed bag over there, but they're not as powerful, right? So from what I've seen in the news, the UK and France are talking about basically taking over the peace negotiations and eventually coming up with a peacekeeping force of about 10 to 30,000 troops that they would essentially put in Ukraine so that if Russia reinvaded again, that they would start killing these peacekeeping troops. And then that would spark like a large war, kind of like a tripwire type thing. And the way I see it is that we're getting to a point where if Trump has cut off Intel, I think they redid the Intel. I'm not really sure, but
he did reintroduce Intel.
Yeah, which doesn't really cost too much. I mean, we're collecting it anyway. So, but they've cut off or paused the aid, and then Europe has upped their aid, and then we're strong arming Ukraine for their minerals and their power plants. And then Zelensky is thinking has to essentially, Ukraine kind of is the pivot. I mean, Trump's treating them as a bargaining chip, but really they have to sign on the dotted line to end the war with Russia. And they need some sort of partner. Without the US aid, and they're getting aid from Europe, I think theoretically that Zelensky could ditch Trump, who he obviously probably hates at this point, and throw in with the Europeans, the Western Europeans, the UK and the French, who are offering troops, because that's what he wants. You know what I mean? He's willing to give up his minerals and shit, but he wants someone else's troops there so that they don't get bullied again. and then basically cut Trump out. He doesn't want Trump to get the Nobel Peace Prize for this Ukraine thing. I mean, like, I have to imagine he hates Trump at this point. So maybe he pivots to UK and France, and then UK and France become the negotiating partners, and maybe some others with Zelensky, cut US out of the equation, and then Russia is forced to work with the French and the UK versus us. They want to work with Trump because Trump is like going kind of easy on them. And then, there's that pivot there, all pivoting off of Ukraine. What do you think about the prospects of UK and France taking over the lead from us?
In many ways, I think they should. They probably should have 4 years ago when Russia started massing troops on Ukraine's border and everybody was saying they're going to invade Ukraine, they're going to invade Ukraine. And everybody put their blinders on because they were buying cheap oil and natural gas from Russia. Introducing 20,000 troops in January of 2022 probably would have prevented all this. But everybody was afraid of Putin cutting off oil and natural gas and wrecking their economy. Bottom line is, what would have happened if 20,000 French and British troops would have went into Ukraine in January 2020? I don't think Putin would have invaded. I think it would have turned into another Berlin Wall, another Iron Curtain, but we may not be where we're at. With regards to France and the UK, if you look at what they've given, they really haven't given all that much. They've given 20, 30 systems. I mean, 12 Challenger tanks, that's a company. The British gave one company of Challenger 2 tanks to the Ukrainians. That's not even a drop in the bucket. With regards to artillery, ammunition, and all that, NATO doesn't have the factories to turn out the numbers that Ukraine needs. With regards to some of the other countries, you're right. They're just fence sitting right now. Yeah, they're putting a drop here, a drop there, and then saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But we have had the lead on this in every aspect from the beginning. Trump ran on that, a massive victory. The American people want to see an end to this. So if Zelensky wants to get closer to Europe, he should. If Europe wants this to continue, then they need to fund it. They need to give the billions and billions of dollars it's going to take to keep this going. At the end of the day, Trump cutting off munitions support is going to force Zelensky to go to Saudi Arabia. He's already announced we're sending a delegation. If Putin doesn't play, then Zelensky, what do you want for Christmas? Oh, you want 50 F-15 or F-16s? Got them. You want more M1s? Got them. Want more Bradleys? Got them. And eventually one side will blink and come back to the table. But what we've given them, when you look at the scale of the fighting there, and I've followed it from the beginning, the equipment that the United States has given, I mean, we gave them a bunch of MRAPs that were sitting in a depot in Livorno, Italy, that we weren't even going to use. So we gave them hand-me-down equipment. Where are all the state-of-the-art weapon systems? Are we saying we don't trust them by not giving them the top-of-the-line equipment? Semi-rhetorical question.
All right. Well, I think it's interesting to talk about the beginning of the war. I think we all obviously want the war to end. It obviously needs to end. It's costing a lot of money, and it's just a mess. And it will, one way or another, end because everybody wants it to end. I think it's good to do a little critique of the beginning of the war, which you brought up, different scenarios, because I personally think that especially with the Biden people and the senior people in the military, mainly officers and these intel people, probably partially some of the CIA people, are incompetent. They're not incompetent in like a day-to-day basis. Like they go to work and they do their job and stuff like that, but their strategic analysis has been wrong. I mean, they were wrong about Afghanistan. They're wrong about Ukraine. They get all these things wrong, not to mention Iraq. They missed 9/11. I mean, you just like Somalia. I mean, just like everything. Like, we just botch everything because of the way we select these people and the systems that we have or whatever. But we're obviously making mistakes. Beginning of the war, you said, what were the options, right? So Putin's massing a couple 100,000 troops in the north and the east of Ukraine. I personally didn't think he was going to invade. I didn't think he wanted this mess. I didn't realize how important it was to him. But I'm also not some professional intel analyst or some general or whatever. They didn't think he was going to invade. And they thought if he did invade that the Ukrainians would just roll over. So what's the point, right? So we're at the beginning of the war. Once they find out that Russia really is going to invade at some point, probably a couple days before it happened for real, and they say the UK and the French put in their troops, then those troops get killed. They got political blowback from that. They probably have some isolationist elements in their government. Like, why are we doing this? They're not part of NATO. I mean, does anyone really care about Ukraine? They're just going to roll over anyway. And then, if they put those troops there and it does escalate, then France and UK are in a hot war with Russia. Russia could just like take submarines, surface them, or they didn't even have to surface them, just shoot missiles out of their submarines, in the English Channel, anywhere around the UK, start hitting anything they want in the UK. And they can't do anything to stop that. You know what I mean? There's all types of nasty shit they can do. They've got sleeper agents all over Europe. I mean, the number of Russian sleeper agents in the United Kingdom is mind-boggling. You know what I mean? Like sabotage, they could poison, they could do all types of shit. They weren't very effective on the cyber warfare stuff, I mean, which was surprising, but I mean, they could do a lot of like nasty shit to these people. And they're like, why? What is France and UK doing? We're definitely not going to do it because of the nuclear and stuff like that. But what do you think about, the beginning of the war, the calculus and all that?
I do think Putin felt he could win. I think his generals probably told him what he wanted to hear. Interesting theory there that generals tell their civilian leadership what they want to hear. I'm not doing a comparison. I'm just saying, again, we have to kind of go back. And I was in Europe when Obama was pulling out heavy units. And the U.S. Army Europe commanding general said this is a huge mistake. You're signaling to Russia that we're not willing to stand for NATO, to stand for. And he said, yeah, whatever. I'm going to save a whole bunch of money by pulling. At the end of the day, John, it comes down to that. It comes down to money. We're going to save it comes down to money and the incumbent getting a second term. That's what drives our global strategy is first termer wants to get a second term. If he saves enough money and gives money back to the taxpayer, then he gets a second term. If you go way back to 2014, even before that, to the late 2000s in Georgia, when Putin went into Georgia, Putin went into Chechnya, and we just kind of looked the other way and said, yeah, whatever, it's no big deal. That's how far you have to go back with him. If you want to do the comparisons of Hitler and the Sudetenland, Hitler and Austria, it is similar, but it's over a much longer period of time. And as we well know, the American voter has a short memory for certain things. So back to the beginning of the war, we gave them 10,000 javelins, which decimated Russia's tank force. But all it did was just cost us a bunch of money. They're doing what a $65,000 missile did with a $600 Radio Shack drone right now, because I don't know that we have enough javelins left to keep up that level of supply. The same with Stingers. They're shooting down $10,000 drones with $1 million missile. We can't sustain that. We have learned a lot of lessons from that in that, low technology can defeat high technology, drone swarms, remote vehicles that take away all your high-tech weapons, low tech to cost you high tech. That costs us money. But I think everybody underestimated what was going to happen in Ukraine. Unfortunately, as we look back in history, that's how war happens. Everybody underestimates what's about to happen, and then it does. And 20th century is a great example of the ongoing European Civil War, which is still going, that dates back to Napoleon.
Is there anything else you want to cover? Running out of time?
No, just to summarize, I think, as I said, this has to end with negotiations. It's not going to make everybody happy. When you sit down at the table and negotiate, rarely does everybody walk away completely pleased. But if you want to end this war that's killing thousands of soldiers a day in some cases and costing the U.S. taxpayer millions of dollars some days, some weeks, then, hey, somebody's got to blink here. Unfortunately, Ukraine is the underdog. They're not going to take back the territory that Russia has unless we give them a massive amount of weapons, ammunition, and funding, and probably introduce more troops from the West. And I'll say to all those folks that have their little Ukrainian flag up, and I stand with Ukraine, the International Legion has taken volunteers, 18 to 60, no military experience. So if you really want to show what you stand for, fly to Poland, cross the border, volunteer, and go to the front line and fight. And then you can put your little Ukrainian flag up on Facebook and stand with Ukraine against Trump. That's all I got to say.
I'll pass. Okay.
Friends of mine that went said don't go. A lot of my friends went early on, and they said absolutely do not go. So
yeah, it's a grinder. Yeah, I personally will pass. I only fight for United States of America, but they're good people. I feel for them. They've been through a lot. I wish they could have some peace and some freedom and their independence. I don't know how things are going to work out when you've got a big, powerful country next door. Sometimes it just doesn't go well. So, yeah,
We can ask Mexico how that works.
that's right. All right. Ask Canada, right?
The Afghans, they won though.
Yeah, the Afghans
Twice.
always win.
They're
Fuckers.
0 they're 0-2 on that. Probably a few more that I'm not counting. But with superpowers, yeah.
Oh, what a country. All right. All right, Ted. Well, thanks for participating. It was a great discussion, and we'll get you back soon. All right, now it's time for debate time with Army friends Robin Byro and Chuck Seal. How are you guys doing today?
Good morning. Doing well. How about you? Hey, Chuck.
Good.
Hey, how are you doing? Great.
Great. All right. Both y'all in the Army. Introduce ourselves real quick. Robin and then Chuck.
Yeah, I joined in 2009 after being on the Obama campaign as a regional director for the Southeast. I was full of adrenaline, full of patriotism, and wanted to serve, and dropped a Ranger contract. So I did that for a few years and then did the reserves for another 5 years. So a total of 10 years in the Army, some of that as a legal specialist, and about 4.5 years as a Ranger at 75th Ranger Regiment.
Chuck.
Joined the military and did intelligence, part of the invasion in Iraq, and was back there a few years later. Got out and worked at the State Department for quite some time, and now I do private consulting.
All right, that's great. Topics this week are the Ukraine truce that is kind of bubbling up right now, the use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport violent gang members, supposedly, and then all of the Trump versus the judges, the decisions, and the stays and the overturns and all the judge action. But my first question though is for Robin. Robin, when are you gonna finish your transition to fully Republican?
So let me explain. I go on national TV multiple times a day, 6 days a week. Well, now this week it's going to be 7, as the Democratic counterpoint to Republicans. And usually it's Newsmax, sometimes other networks. But I like to call myself the common sense Democrat. But I get asked this question all the time, and it's funny because I think I get asked that because I do speak common sense. And it's just sad to me that common sense seems to be a rarity, I guess, for some of the people in my party. But these things should make sense, especially everything that's going on with Ukraine. I'm sort of a fiscal conservative. I'm concerned about our national deficit. It's $36.49 trillion. I'm raising 2 school-aged children. I don't want to pass on $323,046 per tax-paying citizen to my kids. So yeah, you can call me. I mean, I've been called a neocon. I've been called all these things, but yeah.
All right, cool. I just wanted to joke around about that a little bit. I guess Chuck is the non-comments or the unsensical Democrat on this one.
I don't think I'd describe it that way, but I'm definitely not veering off into the right.
Has anyone ever called you a neocon, Chuck?
Never.
Not recently. Okay, cool. All right, so first topic is Ukraine. Robin is going to go first.
My issue here with Ukraine is, of course, taking Putin at his word. That hasn't worked out at all for Ukraine. And, this all goes back to 1994 and nuclear disarmament. And they've had multiple agreements. I think the last count was this was going to be the 22nd agreement that they've had. And it's always Putin backing off of his word. My concern is losing Ukraine as a territory. I don't want to be circling stealth bombers over Europe all the time to try and protect us. It's going to be extraordinarily expensive if we lose Ukraine. I'm just skeptical. President Trump has seemed a little too friendly with Putin. Ukraine is not our enemy. So that's my concern here. But, ceasefire, let's have it. I'm very wary of taking Putin at his word.
Listen, I don't trust Putin in this. And quite honestly, from what I see, I'm not sure that I trust Trump in this either. I'm not sure where his motivations lie. What I am seeing is a willingness and consistent willingness to cozy up to Putin and give him anything he wants at the expense of the Ukrainians, and to try to now just, extract things from Ukraine, right? And we're in this weird situation where I'm not even sure if we're going to end up in this negotiation on the same side as the Europeans, as our strongest allies, and instead perhaps being on the side of Russia as we're trying to extract mineral rights and in control of nuclear facilities from the Ukrainians. And meanwhile, the Europeans are on the other side, actually worried about a lasting peace because it's in their backyard. And I guess I just don't understand how we find ourselves in this situation. And I'm not sure what incentive the Ukrainians have to go along with this. I think, a ceasefire is certainly the right thing, and ending this war is the right thing to do. But I'm not sure that either of these parties are truly interested in that.
I'd like to add that many of us joined in the military after 9/11, and I just want to point out that there were 90 countries who came to our aid after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. None of them asked for mineral rights for us or anything like that. So, I'm just a little bit concerned about us wanting mineral rights from Ukraine. That's just generally, historically, not how this has worked.
Again, as I was saying, I think we're backing away from our European allies. NATO has lasted for many years, and I think given us lasting peace. That we've had skirmishes, but no large scale war, and we've pulled together as a group. It has also led to tremendous ties, economic ties between the United States and Europe. Why are we looking at and cozying up to instead a country that has a smaller economy and is less of a trading partner for the United States? We have deep and lasting economic ties with Germany, France, the United Kingdom, all of which are much larger economies than Russia. I think it's not in our financial interest to be doing this either, right? And maybe extracting some minerals from Ukraine. I guess Donald Trump thinks that that's going to make up for it, but it doesn't seem like it to me. And what do we do with them if we've lost access to our primary trading partners and the people with whom we have such deep and long economic ties?
I want to add that there have been human rights abuses galore with Russia versus Ukraine right now. I'm concerned because as Americans, we've been providing intelligence to Ukraine to help them fight this war. That just stopped last week. Donald Trump ordered that we stop providing Ukraine intelligence to help fight Russia. I don't understand that at all. They are our allies. We need to be providing them the intelligence. We're already paying for this. And like I said, the human rights abuses, there are Ukrainian children, hundreds of thousands of them that are missing right now. And we were tracking them and trying to reunite them with their families. That also stopped last week. So the optics, perception is reality, right? The perception for me is that we're aiding Russia right now with dialing back our providing of intelligence and trying to reunite Ukrainian children with their families. I just don't understand that. That's not what you do to an ally. I have grave concerns here. What's happening in Ukraine is horrible. And I was concerned on the campaign trail because I heard talk of Zelensky being a thug, being a dictator. No. And I could care less what he wears to the Oval Office. They don't seem to have a problem with Senator Fetterman now that he's swung to the right when he's wearing his hoodie.
Or Elon Musk.
Yeah, or Elon Musk, exactly. So I really don't care what anyone wears. And as far as saying thank you, look, like I said, 90 countries came to our aid during September 11th or after September 11th. We didn't thank them. This is a complex mixed bag. And the little things that we pull out and choose to make arguments of are driving me a little bit crazy with an ally of ours.
Chuck, do you think that the Europeans are going to put in any troops on the ground if the peace deal doesn't go?
So I think that Europeans would be willing to put troops on the ground. The question is, how does that happen? And is that something that the U.S. even supports at this point? Again, I'm looking at this and seeing just Donald Trump consistently, espousing the positions that are best for Putin. I also think, just in a broader sense, it's not particularly in the U.S.'s interest to back ourselves entirely out of this process, right? The U.S. is looked at as, a global leader when issues like this come up. And the fact that we're just taking steps back, it leaves a power vacuum. And sure, if the Europeans want to step into that, I think that that's the right thing for them to do. But I'm not sure that that's the right answer for the United States.
Robin, you think the Europeans are going to put troops in if the war doesn't wrap up soon?
So I looked into this. France right now has an army of over 300,000. The UK has 150,000. Of course, we've served with them and the global war on terrorism. I do think that they're indicating a coalition of the willing, that they're ready and willing to do that. Now, I don't think the United States is going to do that. Donald Trump ran on no new wars. I don't think that we are going to place any troops on the ground. But like I said, we can do things like provide them intelligence that we're already paying for. But France and the UK, definitely. I can see them. They've already indicated the coalition of the willing. I'm just concerned about some of the Ukrainian power plants. They have right now 4. They lost 1 in this war with Russia, to Russia. And they're indicating that they want to build another 9 nuclear power plants. So this is going to be tricky and nuanced, John.
All right, that was some great analysis on Ukraine and the possible truce there. Next topic is Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport hundreds of suspected gang members to El Salvador this week. and the judge trying to block it, and the back and forth over that. So Chuck's going to go first on this one. Chuck, you can get started.
I don't think there's anybody who you would ask who is not for removing criminals, particularly violent criminals, gang members, from the United States. I think the question I have, though, is why, when presented with the opportunity to do something and given a policy goal, does Donald Trump consistently look for the minimally legal, maximally inflammatory thing to do in this case, right? It is the harshest possible solution and one that is questionably legal. When he has tools available to him, processes available to him that exist now and do work, right? If you're saying we need more focus and attention on this issue, that is one thing. And you make the existing legal process more robust and more capable. You provide it with additional funding. Instead of simply taking things out of the legal processes and coming up with this new questionable process and then creating, conflicts with judiciary by failing to comply with court orders.
Chuck brings up some good points. No one wants violent criminals here. Tren de Aragua, yes, they're a gang. But the issue here is that they're using an act from 1798 to not just round up violent criminals. And that's the talking point that I always hear from conservatives on television, is that we're only taking the violent criminals. No, we're not. If you read the articles, if you actually do your research and read the articles, they're taking all of the Venezuelans. And I did the analysis on this, and it costs an average $5,966 per undocumented immigrant to put them on these flights and send them over. And in some cases, they're getting turned around. We just saw that happen this week. It happened a couple of weeks ago. It's a massive boondoggle, a huge expense to the United States. That is an issue. Some of these people are being sent to countries that they've never been. They don't even speak the language anymore. I'm concerned about human rights abuses. We're sending them in some cases to their deaths. That's not what we should be doing as Americans. I'm not as concerned about getting undocumented immigrants out as I am about human rights abuses here. Judge Boasberg, Donald Trump called him a radical left lunatic. That is not language that I appreciate from a United States sitting president. But yes, undocumented immigrants are a huge problem. We saw that in the election, right? I can tell you as a Democrat that that's one of the reasons that we lost the election, was because we weren't more tough on immigration.
Continuing on the same point that I was making, I mean, what is Trump doing here? Is his goal to expel these violent criminals, as he says, which, as you just heard, many of these people are not violent criminals. They've had no access to due process. Or is his goal to sort of dismantle the sort of legal order that we have in the United States right now? I think he is, in using this Alien Enemies Act, he's determining that he can unilaterally declare war in the United States and take actions as a wartime president. And he is also declaring that people in the United States don't necessarily have access to due process. Their rights can be stripped of them because of a suspicion of activities. That's just not the way that the United States works. And I think he's very strategic in choosing a population, saying that they are gang members, that they are foreign gang members, that they're scary to people. And what that does is it creates a situation where he gets some latitude to take these actions. And then he has seized this power. And next time it's someone else. It's not someone like, a criminal. And so, yes, while some people may be wrapped up in this, I'm even more worried. Some innocent people may be getting wrapped up in this. I'm even more worried about the bigger issue and the power grab that this means, and what that could be in phase two.
All right, Robin.
We saw something unique this week and unprecedented. A sitting Supreme Court Justice, Justice Roberts, cautioned the presidential administration that he cannot impeach judges. That's not how this works. And look, this week, I actually had to debate President Trump's spiritual advisor, one of, I guess, many. But he was arguing that the president has unilateral power and that the judicial branch and legislative branch should not interfere with the executive branch. That's not a democracy. That's not what we fought for as soldiers. There are checks and balances right now built into our government. That's the way it's always been set up. So no, it's not a dictatorship. The executive branch should not run unchecked. It drove me wild that they were saying that. Actually, the spiritual advisor argued that it's not the United States' place to feed hungry children. That was coming from a spiritual advisor, mind you. So, I'm a deacon of my church, as someone who is a believer. That was tough with me. But like I said, there should be checks and balances. There always have been. Impeaching judges? No. And that's Justice Roberts, mind you, who said that.
All right, well, the Alien Enemies Act will play out as it plays out. It's pretty interesting. Last topic that we're going to talk about is the overall judges versus Trump. Trump's had a lot of wins and losses in the courts, and there have been some interesting events over the last week with military trans ban being overturned and the judge forcing Trump to rehire USAID employees and other probationary employees that they fired recently. So Robin's going to go first.
There is precedent here for the federal government to be shrunk, not just by Republicans, but by Democrats. When he was president, Bill Clinton shrunk the federal government by 344,000 federal jobs. And we had a surplus, a national surplus. We went from a deficit to a surplus. And we all got those checks, if you recall, from George W. Bush for that. Also, President Harry Truman, when he was in office, was a Democrat, and he shrunk the federal government by 566,000 federal jobs. The government sometimes gets ballooned, sometimes too huge, and it becomes necessary to shrink it. I'm not arguing that that's a bad thing. What I'm arguing is that flooding the job market all at once with everybody all at once, hundreds of thousands of employees, is a bad thing. I've got friends right now who are looking for jobs, and there's tons of people now competing for those jobs. That's not good for everyday Americans.
Yeah, sure. We can shrink the federal government, but we need to do it in a smart way. What are we doing here? Once again, we have a rule of law. And I think what I see from the outside is I see a president and Elon Musk, an advisor, who are operating in a way that seems clear to me they realize is not legal. They're taking these actions because try me later, right? If I've already fired all these people and decimated, an agency, it's going to be very difficult to reconstitute that. It's going to be very difficult to pull things back together. I mean, they've started emptying out office buildings, taking signs off of buildings. So it doesn't really matter if a judge says to bring people back. Many won't come back. You've sort of accomplished much of the goal that you had. And what you've also done is terrorize anyone who decided to stay. And you've done it in a non-legal way. We have laws, we have processes. That's just the way we work, and that's what he should be doing. He should be take a look at the federal government. Are there things that we need to adjust? Do a surgical look at cutting out the waste, fraud, waste, and abuse, as he says. But don't just take a sledgehammer and knock things down and break stuff so that things that we truly need and are congressionally mandated are now not happening.
Elon Musk might want to take a surgical look at Tesla's books. Lost $1.4 billion while he was goofing off in D.C. here.
One thing that I want to point out, Chuck brought a great point about this being should be a surgical strike, because this is not. He's literally taking a chainsaw. I mean, he came up there on the stage with a big old chainsaw, and they've been cutting people. They're also selling the building, the federal buildings. So when we have the next president, whoever that may be, it's going to be very difficult to put some of these institutions back in place. I've got 2 school-age children right now, one on an IEP plan. I'm very concerned about losing, for example, the Department of Education, because that's who oversees the federal student loan program, FAFSA, IEP programs, funding for very underprivileged poor schools in some of the red states. I'm talking to you from Georgia, so my kids will be directly affected by this. Yes, of course, the federal government gets too big sometimes and should be shrunk. But the way we're going about this could damage our nation's children. And frankly, people are getting paid vacations right now. DOJ is supposed to be shrinking the federal government in a smart way. Some of these people are getting a month off vacation with back pay and getting rehired. I have a problem with that.
Yep. Chuck?
Yeah, and as I said, they are terrorizing these populations and leaving people not understanding where they stand. And when you look at military service members, trans service members who are serving with honor and distinction and doing laudable work for the U.S. military voluntarily, they now know that they're a target and they really don't know where they stand. Is the president just going to come at them again with some other potentially illegal way to try to kick them out of the military? And is that the life that you want, right? So people are pushing back. And do you know why Donald Trump and Elon Musk can do this? Because they don't feel it. It doesn't matter to them. They're not part of these populations. They don't understand. The impact won't be on them. Getting rid of the Department of Education has zero impact on Donald Trump, on his children or grandchildren, on Elon Musk and his children. None of them are going to feel that is gone because they're going to the best private schools in the country. And when Elon Musk gets up on TV and talks about eliminating Social Security, looking at Social Security, he can say that as the richest man in the world who's made more than $100 billion in the last few months. That's easy for him to say, but there are a lot of elderly people in the United States who need that money, who count on that money, and it's not so simple for them.
I want to point out that just this week, Senator Rand Paul cautioned the president and Elon Musk that this is not being done in a way that is legally sustainable, because these institutions, these government agencies are already funded by Congress. So unilaterally cutting these agencies is going against what was already approved by Congress and can be overturned in court, which is what we're seeing right now. Some of these are being overturned in court, and these judges are being called, judicial activists. But no, the issue is that it's not being done the right way. Some of these need to be done through Congress if these things are going to stick, and they're not. It's cutting out the legislative branch. It's just not a good way. It's untenable. That's why these rulings are happening. Frankly, one of the things I love about Republicans is they're frankly very much against unelected bureaucrats. If Elon Musk is not an unelected bureaucrat, I don't know what he is. And frankly, he's giving powers right now that should only be granted to people who have been elected through an election into an elected office or are confirmed by the Senate. And he's neither of those things. That's what I have an issue with.
All right. So, Chuck, what do you love about Republicans?
I love that they're doing a really good job at tarnishing their public image right now by supporting the things that are coming out of this White House and Elon Musk. I'm consistently blown away again at the like minimally legal, maximally cruel nature of the things that are happening here. Once again, without end, right? I don't think that removing many of these regulations, removing the people that they're looking to remove, are good for the US economy. So this is just one more example of where there's this power grab to seize power within the White House, change the sort of world or national order and the way that things happen outside of the legal structure in a way that's actually counter to economic interests.
I will say with regard to Elon Musk too, like if the Democrats, Joe Biden or any Democrat or Kamala Harris was in the White House and they got some foreigner who, okay, naturalized citizen, whatever, right? This guy grew up in another country, a billionaire foreigner, to come into the White House, talk all this shit on TV and start cutting the Defense Department, the CIA, all the stuff that the Republicans love, their heads would be exploding. They wouldn't be like, oh, thank God we got this genius in there to like fix all the stuff that us Americans can't seem to figure out. I mean, if the Democrats did this, it'd be like nuclear war in the politics. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
We need to talk more about the transgender ban on troops,
Sure.
because that also came up this week. And let me just point out, as a legal specialist, I worked to implement the integration of these troops into our forces. We spent hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, billions of dollars on integrating these individuals into our troops. I provided all the training, and I served side by side with transgender troops in the reserves. And let me just say that these were some of the best soldiers that we had. They took over the arms room. They took over the supply room. You guys served. You remember our supply rooms, especially I can tell you in the reserves, they were a mess. But these troops got all of that together and served with distinction and honor. I'm bothered by the fact that they were unilaterally swept up and told that they were going to get fired for no reason. So I'm glad that was overturned this week. And it was because the judge said the decision was soaked in animus and violated the Equal Protection Clause. So I'm glad that these soldiers are getting protected. These are hard fighting soldiers. They had a lot to prove. Let me just say, I'm an openly gay guy. I served in Ranger Regiment as an openly gay guy, and I had to prove myself. I had to work a little bit harder, a little bit longer, and fight harder to sort of neutralize that as a threat and have my peers' backs. So I'm glad that the ruling got overturned.
All right, Chuck, you got anything on the transgender ban?
I feel exactly the same way. I think it was arbitrary. And again, this is being done in a way to make headlines, not necessarily to solve problems. There are real things to focus on. We're finding with so many of these issues, there are real things that could be done, real things that the president could be focusing his attention on to accomplish and move forward. And instead, we're wasting time making headlines that are red meat for his base and angering the other side and just sowing division. And then you have a vulnerable population caught in the middle, a population who does just want to go to work and do their job and be a regular person and are serving voluntarily with honor.
Great sentiments that you guys got there. I pretty much roughly agree with y'all. So, all right. So that's the end of the show. Do you guys have any final words, starting with Robin?
It's just been an honor to have an open discussion. We need more of this in our country. The country is deeply divided. So we need to be having conversations like this that touch on these issues. We need to be seeing our neighbors as neighbors, talking to them across political lines and seeing where we can agree on, because we're deeply divided. I'm not sure how we're going to move past this without having, frankly, good discourse like this. Thank you. So thank you for the show. Thank you for having me.
All right, Chuck.
Yeah, I agree. I think that this is important, and I think it's important for people to be paying attention and listening. I think, as I said, we have a president right now who's trying to sow division, and I think most of us don't want to be divided, but we are falling into that trap of getting caught up with this red meat, getting angry, and fighting with each other, while there's a bunch of stuff happening in the background that I don't think any of us really care for. And I think you see as conservative Republicans are finding out what's being done by things like Doge, they're up in arms and they're talking to their Congress people about it. And I think that's the right answer. We need to be paying attention to this stuff. We need to be talking. Thanks for having this and having a forum to do that, John.
All right, great. All right, well, Chuck, I'm glad that we were able to get Robin back on the liberal side of the equation here, where he belongs.
Well,
I agree.
Common sense. There needs to be more common sense.
Yes, liberal positions are common sense. You got it.
I really do want to stop seeing us versus them. We need to be having these discussions. I don't know how else we're going to survive.
All right, great. Okay, so that's the end of Real Veteran News 46. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll do it again next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.